Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tales of Darkness. Tonight, you will hear about things that never needed invitations, reflections that move on their own, and shadows that arrive quietly and stay longer than anyone else. These are stories of homes, roads, and rooms that should have been safe until something inside them decided to pay attention. Turn off the lights. Listen to the sounds around you, and if anything starts to sound a little too familiar, keep listening anyway. But before we start, I need you to watch this entire video. Do not click away, because the most important information, the truth you need to know, will be revealed at the very end. Let us begin. Story 1. The Woman in the Yard. My name is Carmen, and I used to think that seeing something once meant it was only your imagination. If it happened again, you could blame stress. But when it keeps returning, watching you from the same place every time, you eventually run out of excuses. The house I lived in back then was simple. One bedroom, a small living room, and a narrow yard behind it that ended at a line of trees. There were no neighbors directly behind me, just that dark row of trunks and branches that turned into a solid black wall at night. The first night I saw her, I was on the couch, half asleep, with the television playing softly. The curtain was open just enough for me to see a narrow slice of the yard through the glass. I almost missed it. Something white, still, too tall to be a plant, too solid to be fog. I squinted and sat up. There, near the trees at the edge of the yard, stood a woman in a long, pale dress. I couldn't make out her face, only the outline of her body. She didn't look like she was standing on the ground at all. She hovered just slightly above it, so subtly that my mind kept trying to correct what I was seeing. I blinked, looked away, then looked back. She was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the television screen. I closed the curtain and went to bed. The second time, I didn't have that excuse. I was washing dishes in the kitchen, facing the small window that overlooked the yard. It was late, and the glass reflected the dark room behind me. I could see my shoulders, my hands moving under the water, the glow of the overhead light. Then another shape appeared in the reflection. A woman, standing exactly where the living room met the hallway, still, watching. I spun around, my heart pounding. There was no one there. When I turned back to the window, the reflection showed only me again. The empty doorway, the silent living room. I left the kitchen light on that night. After that, she began to appear more often. Sometimes, at the edge of the yard, hovering just above the ground in her pale dress, too far away to see her face, but close enough to feel her attention. Other times, she appeared only in reflections behind me. Always in the same spot, as if that exact place in the house belonged to her. The air would change right before I saw her. It didn't turn cold the way people describe in stories. Instead, it became heavy, like the room had taken a shallow breath and refused to let it go. One evening, I finally did something I had been avoiding. I stepped out into the yard. The sky was clear. No fog, no wind. The trees stood silent at the boundary, and the grass felt normal beneath my feet. I walked all the way to the edge and looked back at the house, half expecting to see her watching from the window. Nothing. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. That night, I woke with a strange sensation. I was lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, when I felt it's someone watching me from above. The feeling was so strong that I didn't dare move at first. My eyes slowly adjusted to the faint light coming in from outside. The ceiling looked the same as always. Then something shifted at the edge of my vision. I turned my head toward the window. She was there, not outside in the yard, not in a reflection, floating outside my bedroom window. Her dress hung motionless around her, pale and almost glowing against the darkness. Her feet didn't touch the ground. Her head was tilted slightly, as if she were trying to see inside. The worst part was her height. My bedroom was on a raised foundation. The bottom of the window was higher than anyone could reach from the outside. But she was right there, perfectly level with me, as if the world outside had shifted just enough to let her rise. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I shut my eyes tightly for a moment, then forced them open again. The window was empty. I didn't sleep again until daylight. From that night on, she no longer waited at the edge of the yard. She came closer. I caught glimpses of her in the reflection of the turned-off television standing behind the couch where I sat, in the bathroom mirror behind my shoulder near the door, always just far enough away that I couldn't see her features, only the pale outline of her body, only the suggestion of long hair drifting around her. One evening, I had a friend over. I was desperate for normal conversation, for noise, for anything that made the house feel like a regular place again. We talked, watched something on the screen, and laughed louder than usual. Then my friend went quiet. He was staring past me toward the hallway. I turned. There was nothing there. When I asked what was wrong, he shook his head and forced a smile. But his eyes kept drifting back to that spot, as if he expected something to return to it. He left early that night. A few days later, I finally decided to leave the house. I packed slowly, more exhausted than afraid, feeling watched with every trip from room to room. As I carried the last box through the living room, I passed the window one final time. She was in the yard again. Closer now, not near the trees, but almost in the center of the grass, floating just above it, facing the house. For the first time, I could see more than a silhouette. Her head was tilted too far to one side, as if her neck had learned where to stop and gone just past it. Her face was pale, but not like skin. It looked like something trying to remember what a face was supposed to be. Her eyes were fixed on me, not angry, not pleading, just certain. I didn't look away. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out of that house for the last time. Now I live in a place without a yard, no trees, no ground-level windows. My view is made of other buildings and distant lights. But sometimes, at night, when I look at the glass, I see a faint shape reflected behind me, hovering just above the floor. Head tilted, patient, like she finally found a way to follow without needing the yard at all. And that's the thing about some presences. They don't stay where you first notice them. They learn where you look. Next, we're going to hear the story of the breathing in the walls. Story 2. The breathing in the walls. My name is Matteo, and for a long time, I believed that silence was empty. I thought that when a room went quiet, it meant nothing was happening inside it. That belief ended in the apartment where I lived during one of the most exhausting years of my life. The place was small and forgettable. One bedroom, a narrow living room, a short hallway, and a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The walls were thin, the kind that carried sound easily. But at night, the building often felt abandoned. Most of the neighbors worked early shifts, so by the time I came home, everything was already dark and still. I usually slept on the couch, not because the bed was uncomfortable, but because the living room felt more open. I liked having space around me. I always left the television on low just enough to keep the silence away. The first night it happened, I woke suddenly with the feeling that something was wrong. The television was off. I knew I hadn't turned it off. The remote was still on the table, exactly where I had left it. The room felt darker than it should have, heavier somehow. As my eyes adjusted, I heard it. Breathing, slow, deep, unnaturally steady. It didn't sound sick or tired. It sounded calm, controlled, as if whoever was breathing had no reason to rush. I sat up slowly, listening. The sound seemed to come from the living room wall, the one shared with another apartment. I told myself it had to be a neighbor asleep too close to the wall, the sound traveling through the structure. I muted the television. The breathing continued. I held my own breath. The sound didn't change. That was when unease settled into my chest. The breathing didn't match anything human. It didn't hesitate. It didn't shift. It didn't react to my movement at all. I turned the television back on louder this time. The breathing faded beneath the noise, and eventually, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. The next night, it returned. This time, I was fully awake, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hand. The breathing started softly, almost politely from the same wall. I muted the television again and listened. The sound grew clearer. I stood up and pressed my ear against the wall. The breathing shifted, not louder, closer, as if whatever was making it had leaned in, aware of my attention. I stepped back quickly, my heart pounding. The wall felt cold against my palm, colder than the rest of the apartment. That night, I barely slept. Over the following days, the breathing became familiar, not constant, but persistent. It always appeared late, always when the apartment was quiet enough to notice it. If I made noise, it stopped. If I stayed still, it returned. Then, it changed. One night, while brushing my teeth, I heard the breathing behind me. Not through the wall, inside the apartment. I froze, staring at my reflection. The mirror showed my tired face and the open doorway behind me. Nothing else, no movement, no shadow. The breathing continued slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere near the ceiling in the hallway. I turned around. Nothing was there. From that moment on, the sound no longer belonged to one place. Sometimes it came from the bedroom door. Sometimes from the corner above the couch. Once, I heard it directly behind me while standing at the sink, close enough that the air against my neck felt warmer. I never saw anything, but I felt it. The air thickened when it was close, pressing against my skin like invisible weight. My chest tightened, my body reacting before my mind could explain why. It felt like the apartment was no longer just space but something being shared. I tried everything to stop it. Lights stayed on all night. Music played constantly. The television never went silent. The breathing always waited. When the noise faded, it returned. One night, exhausted and angry, I whispered into the darkness, "Stop." The breathing paused. The silence that followed was different. Focused, intent, as if the room itself were leaning toward me, listening. Then a voice answered, "No." It wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening, it was certain. The breathing resumed, closer than ever, right beside the couch. I felt the cushion dip slightly, as if someone had sat down without making a sound. From that night on, it stopped hiding. In bed, I felt the mattress sink near my feet. On the couch, The space beside me compressed slowly, deliberately. The breathing came from directly above me, as if something were leaning over my body, studying how I reacted. It never touched me. It didn't need to. On the final night, I packed a bag and sat awake until morning. I listened as the breathing moved through the apartment room, by room slow and methodical, like it was memorizing the layout. When the first light of dawn reached the windows, it stopped. I left that day and never returned. I live somewhere else now. Different walls, different sounds, a louder building. Most nights are quiet. But sometimes when everything is still and the silence feels too deliberate, I hear it again. A slow, steady breath, not coming from the walls, coming from somewhere much closer. And that's the worst part. Once you notice it, you start realizing the sound was never trapped in the apartment. It was just learning how close it could get. Next, we're going to hear the story of the mirror that moved first. Story 3. The mirror that moved first. My name is Laura, and before this happened, I never thought twice about mirrors. They were just objects, glass and reflection. Something you passed without noticing, something that showed you what was already there. That belief didn't survive the apartment where I lived alone for the first time. The place was narrow and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deeper at night. A small living room, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a long hallway connecting everything. At the end of that hallway, directly across from my bedroom door, there was a tall mirror mounted to the wall. No frame, just glass, cold, clean, and permanent. It was already there when I moved in. I didn't choose it. I didn't question it. The first strange moment came on an ordinary morning. I was half awake, brushing my hair, staring at my own face. I lifted my arm, and the reflection followed a fraction of a second late, not a full delay. Not something anyone else would notice. But I felt it immediately. That instinctive drop in the stomach you get when something is wrong and your mind refuses to accept it. I tested it again. A quick blink, a head tilt, a small wave. Everything looked normal. I laughed quietly and blamed exhaustion. But after that, I started avoiding the hallway without realizing it. I took the long way around. I kept my eyes on the floor. Passing that mirror made my chest tighten, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. At night, it was worse. The hallway light flickered, sometimes a weak, buzzing glow that stretched shadows and softened their edges. The mirror caught those shadows and held them, making the hallway look deeper than it really was. One night, I woke suddenly with the certainty that someone was standing outside my door. I lay still and listened. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. A thin strip of light spilled from the hallway beneath my door. Nothing passed in front of it. Nothing shifted. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty, except for the mirror. My reflection stood there, facing me. But it wasn't doing what I was doing. I was frozen in the doorway, one hand on the frame. My reflection tilted its head slightly, slow and deliberate, like it was studying my face. That single movement felt like a hand closing around my throat. I shut the door and locked it. Then I backed away, refusing to look again. I stayed awake until morning with my bedside lamp on, replaying that head tilt over and over until it stopped feeling like a memory and started feeling like a loop. The next day, I tried to be rational. I told myself it had been a dream, a sleep confusion, stress. That night proved me wrong. A sound woke me just after midnight. Tap, pause, tap, not wood, not metal, glass. It came from the hallway. I sat up in bed, staring at the door, my heart racing. The tapping continued slow and patient, like someone knocking without hands. When it stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than any silence I had ever known. From then on, the mirror did small things. Things that were easy to doubt. Easy to explain away if you wanted to keep living inside your own head. Sometimes, my reflection didn't blink when I did. Sometimes, it smiled a heartbeat late. Once, I swear it raised its hand before I moved mine. I stopped turning on the hallway light at night. I didn't want to see it clearly. I didn't want to give it more detail to work with, but it didn't need light. One night, I woke up and found my bedroom door open. I knew I had locked it. I sat up slowly, staring into the dark hallway. The mirror reflected my room faintly, catching the weak glow from the window. In that reflection, I could see myself in bed, and beside my reflected body, there was another shape, tall, thin, darker than the rest of the room. It leaned over my sleeping reflection, its head tilted as if listening to my breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The fear wasn't loud. It was quiet and heavy, like a hand pressing down on my chest. Then the shape lifted its head and looked directly into the mirror. At me. I pulled the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to make myself smaller, trying not to exist. I stayed like that until exhaustion dragged me under. In the morning, the door was closed. The hallway was empty. The mirror stood still. I tried to pretend it was over. I left the mirror uncovered that day like an experiment, like proof to myself that I wasn't afraid. That evening, as I walked down the hall, I caught my reflection in the corner of my eye. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking past me toward the bedroom behind my shoulder. I turned fast enough to make myself dizzy. Nothing was there. When I faced the mirror again, my reflection was normal, calm, perfectly copied. But my skin didn't believe it. That night, I tried to move the mirror. I don't know why I thought I could. It was mounted firmly, heavier than it looked. But I tried anyway. The glass didn't shift. Instead, the hallway light flickered once. And in that brief blink of darkness, I felt something very close behind me. Not a touch, not a breath, just presence filling the space like smoke. When the light steadied, the hallway was empty again. I covered the mirror with a sheet and left it like that for the rest of the week. The apartment felt slightly better. Not safe, just less aware. Then, on my last night there, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not from the hallway, from inside my bedroom. I sat up, frozen, staring at the dark sheet covering the mirror across the hall. The tapping continued slow and patient, like it was reminding me it could reach anywhere it wanted. I packed the next morning and left. Before stepping out for good, I passed the covered mirror one last time. The sheet hung still flat and harmless. But as I reached the front door, I felt the same pressure between my shoulders, the unmistakable certainty of being watched. I didn't turn around. Now I live somewhere else. There are no mirrors in my hallway. I made sure of that. But sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a dark window or a turned-off screen. And it feels eager, like it's waiting for me to blink so it can move first. And next, we're going to hear the story of the hallway that answered back. Story 4. The hallway that answered back. My name is Daniel, and I learned something the hard way. A home can get used to you. It can learn your routine. your timing, your weak points. And once it does, it doesn't need to scare you loudly. It only needs to respond when you're certain no one should. I moved into that place because it was affordable and quiet, the kind of quiet people usually pay extra for. 1 floor, a short hallway, a living room connected to the kitchen, and a bedroom tucked behind a door that always felt a little too thin. There was nothing dramatic about the first week. No cold spots, no shadows, no strange dreams. Just normal settling noises and the occasional creak that comes with older buildings. I started to relax. Then the hallway started answering me. It began with footsteps. Late one night, I got up to get water. I stepped into the hallway barefoot, the floor cold beneath my feet. I took 3 steps toward the kitchen. Behind me, 3 steps followed. Not an echo, not a delay. Perfect timing, like someone walking in the same rhythm, the same pace. Just a few feet back, I stopped. The steps stopped. I held my breath and listened. Nothing else. No breathing, no movement. Just that deep, empty silence that makes your own heartbeat feel like a sound you shouldn't be making. I turned around quickly. The hallway was empty. I told myself it had been the building floorboards settling, a pipe shifting, some harmless structural sound matching my movement by coincidence. That explanation felt weak even while I believed it. The next night, it happened again. I walked down the hallway slower this time, testing it. Step, step, step. Behind me, the same. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it moved. When I turned around, there was nothing. It wasn't chasing. It wasn't rushing. It was practicing. After that, I avoided the hallway at night. I kept a bottle of water beside my bed. I tried to keep my life contained to the bedroom and living room after dark, but it didn't stay in the hallway for long. It learned the rest of the apartment. One evening, I was sitting on the couch watching something with the lights low. The hallway behind me was dark. I could see its entrance in my peripheral vision, a black rectangle leading toward my bedroom. Then I heard a soft sound from that darkness. A single step, not on the floor, not in the hallway, behind the wall. Like something had placed weight against the surface itself, testing how sound traveled through it. I muted the television. The apartment went silent. Then the sound came again, closer, like it had moved to the other side of the wall near the couch. A slow, careful scrape followed, as if something dragged its fingertips along the paint. My skin prickled. I told myself not to look toward the hallway, because looking would make it real. The scrape stopped. A moment later, the couch cushion beside me sank slightly, as if someone had sat down without making a sound. I jumped up so fast my knees hit the coffee table. The cushion rose again, empty. That night, I slept with every light on. The next morning, I tried to be rational. I checked the locks, the windows, the vents. I searched for anything that could explain the sounds: loose panels, animals, old pipes. Everything looked normal. But the apartment didn't feel normal anymore. It felt alert. That afternoon, I came home from work and noticed something small but wrong. My bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it. Not just closed, locked. It wasn't forced. No damage. It was simply open, like a decision had been made while I was gone. I shut it again, harder than necessary. I left the living room light on all evening, telling myself it was a mistake, a lapse in memory, nothing more. That night, I heard knocking. Not from the front door, From the hallway wall, 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced like a signal. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. 3 knocks again. Then a pause. Then, very quietly, a whisper from the hallway. Not a clear sentence, just the shape of words. Like a voice that didn't fully remember how to form them, I pulled the blanket up and tried to disappear into it. The whisper stopped. The next morning, there were marks on the hallway wall. Not scratches deep enough to be damaged, just faint streaks, like something had pressed oily fingers against the paint and dragged them downward. They were at shoulder height. Too high for an animal, too uneven for a normal smudge. I wiped them away. The cloth came back clean. The marks faded only slightly, as if the wall had absorbed them. That was the first time I considered leaving. But leaving costs money, time, effort, and like most people, I told myself I could handle one more week. That week was when it started copying me. It began with small things. I cleared my throat in the living room. A moment later, from the hallway, a soft sound followed like a throat clearing back. I tapped my finger on the armrest while thinking. 3 taps. From the hall, 3 taps returned. I stopped moving. I sat still, hands on my knees, refusing to make a sound. The apartment stayed quiet. Then, without warning, it made a sound on its own. A single tap from the hallway wall. It wasn't echoing me anymore. It was starting the pattern. The worst night came when I finally broke a rule I didn't know I'd been following. I spoke to it. It was late. I was exhausted. I heard the familiar soft steps behind the wall and the faint tapping near the hallway entrance. Something in me snapped the part that wanted control. "Stop doing that," I said, louder than I meant to. Silence. Then, from the hallway, my own voice answered. "Stop doing that." Same tone, same rhythm, the same slight rasp I get when I'm tired. My blood went cold. I backed away from the hallway, my eyes locked on the dark opening, my heart pounding, afraid to blink for too long. The voice spoke again, still mine but not quite right. "Come here." It sounded like me, imitating myself, like someone had listened for days and finally decided it could use my voice. I did not go into the hallway. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment, walking fast, not looking behind me. I stayed in my car until the sky began to lighten, too afraid to be indoors, too tired to drive anywhere else. When I returned, the apartment looked normal, but I knew what normal was worth now. I moved out within days. I left furniture behind. I didn't care. I wanted distance. For a while, it worked. Then, weeks later, in a different place, I was walking down a different hallway toward my bedroom. Barefoot, quiet, and behind me, perfectly timed, came 3 soft steps. As if the thing that learned my rhythm didn't care which hallway I lived in, only that I was still walking, only that I could still hear it answering back. And next, we're going to hear the story of the closet that breathed. Story 5, The Closet That Breathed. My name is Sophia, and there is a sound I will never forget. Not a scream, not a whisper, just the quiet, unmistakable sound of someone standing too close when no one should be there. It happened in the house where I grew up, a place I always believed was safe, not because it was special, but because it was familiar. Every step on the stairs had a reason. Every creak in the walls had an explanation. Or at least, I thought it did. My bedroom was at the end of the hallway, small and simple, with one window facing the street and a closet built into the wall beside my bed. The closet door was old and warped. It never closed properly unless you forced it, and even then, it always drifted open a few inches during the night. That never bothered me. Until the breathing started. The first time I heard it, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone with the lights off. The house was completely silent, the kind of silence that only exists when everyone else is asleep. At first, I thought the sound came from outside. Maybe a car passing slowly. Maybe wind slipping through a crack in the window. Then it happened again. Slow, steady, very close. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the closet. I froze, my phone slipping slightly in my hand. I held my breath and listened. The sound continued at the same calm rhythm, as if whoever was making it didn't need air the way I did. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Old houses make noise. Closets trap air. Fear fills in the gaps. I reached over and turned on the lamp. The breathing stopped instantly. The closet door was exactly where it always was, open just enough to show darkness inside. No movement, no shadow, nothing disturbed. I slept with the light on that night. After that, the breathing returned every few nights. Always when the lights were off. Always when the house was quiet. If I shifted in bed, it would pause. If I stayed still, it would continue. It felt aware. One night, exhausted and frustrated, I whispered into the dark, "Hello." The breathing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the room itself was waiting. Then, something inside the closet shifted. Not footsteps, not fabric, just weight, as if something inside had adjusted its position. I didn't speak again. Over the following weeks, small things began to change. My chair wouldn't be where I left it. The closet door would be wider open than before, even when I was sure I had pushed it closed. Sometimes I found fingerprints on the inside of the door, faint smudges that vanished when I touched them. Then there was the smell. A stale, trapped odor like air that hadn't moved in a very long time. It only appeared at night. Only when the breathing returned. It lingered near the bed, thick and uncomfortable, making it hard to breathe deeply. The worst night came without warning. I woke up unable to move. My body felt pressed into the mattress, heavy and unresponsive. I could breathe, but barely. My eyes were open, fixed on the dark outline of the closet. The door was fully open. The breathing was louder now, no longer hiding. It filled the room, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was inside no longer needed to pretend. The air shifted. I felt it move out of the closet. Not walking, not crawling. Just occupying space closer to the bed. The mattress dipped slightly near my feet. Something was standing there. Then I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a word yet. My name. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a voice learning how to shape sound into meaning, like something that had listened for a long time and finally decided to try. Tears slid into my hair as I tried to scream. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My chest burned as I struggled to breathe. The presence leaned closer. I felt it near my legs, then my waist, then my chest, not touching, just close enough that my skin reacted on its own. And then, just as suddenly, the pressure lifted. My body unlocked all at once. I sat up gasping, my hand slamming into the lamp as it flickered on. The room was empty. The closet door was closed. The next morning, I told my mother everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't argue. She went into my room and stood in front of the closet for a long time without speaking. That same day, she removed the door. She said it was old, unsafe, that it needed to go. She never replaced it. Without the door, the breathing stopped. The smell faded. The room felt lighter, like air finally moving through a space that had been holding something back. Years passed. I moved away, lived in other places. I always avoided closets near the bed, always kept doors open. Most nights are quiet, but sometimes, when I lie awake and the room feels too still, I hear it again. Not from a closet, not from a corner, from right behind me. A slow, patient breath. As if whatever learned my name back then never needed the door at all. Closing Tales of Darkness. This concludes tonight's stories on Tales of Darkness. And if you're still listening, it means the silence around you hasn't felt quite right for a while. That's how it begins. These stories don't end when the video does. They linger in empty rooms. They repeat familiar sounds. They wait for the moment when the lights go out and the house settles into quiet. So before you sleep tonight, pay attention to the noises that come back, to reflections that feel a second too late, to the sense that something has learned where you are. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe to Tales of Darkness, because new stories arrive regularly, and they always find those who return. Stay aware, and remember, some things don't need to be invited. They only need to be noticed. Good night.